President Gertler, Provost Regehr, Dean Amon, ladies and gentlemen, and especially the graduates of the class of 2015. I am deeply honored here today to witness your joy as the new class of 2015. This is your day. Celebrate your wonderful accomplishments and heroic efforts. But a word of caution. Be sure to celebrate, but not for too long. Soon you'll discover the world is changing much faster than you expected, and that your career as an engineer is really a career in lifelong learning. I am humbled to receive this great honor from this illustrious university. Many years ago, I graduated from a department in this engineering school that was then called Engineering Physics. The school must have decided that engineering physics was too easy, for shortly after I graduated, the school broadened the name of the department to Engineering Science. Nevertheless, the education that I received from this engineering school at that time was world-class and provided me with a rock-solid foundation for my future career. And I am sure that the education that you have received will be even more helpful in boosting your career. It is de rigueur for a convocation speaker to offer a few pieces of advice to the new graduates. But I will be brief. I will only offer 2 pieces of advice. These are pieces of advice that I found very useful and valuable in my own life. My first piece of advice is to take advantage of the unexpected. It is eloquently captured in the Latin phrase, carpe diem, seize the day, made famous by the late Robin Williams in the movie Dead Poet Society. Throughout my life, I have practiced carpe diem many times, and these instances have changed my life very much for the better. The most important instance of carpe diem that I practiced occurred 1 year after I graduated from the University of Toronto. I had been asked by a friend to be an usher at his wedding in Ottawa. At the reception following the wedding, I noticed this beautiful young woman dancing with her father. I had never met this woman before. Somehow, as a shy young engineer, I mustered enough courage to ask this beautiful young woman to dance with me. And 2 years later, we were married in Ottawa. At that time, Canadian women were fast workers, and I suspect they haven't changed even to this day. Today, I'm delighted that this beautiful woman, Adrian, and our 2 daughters, Susan and Catherine, and their children, Corinne, Julie, Benjamin, and Noah, were able to attend this grand event and see my alma mater. I am pleased that Dr. Hayes Muma, Kathy's husband, is here as well. Engineering at Toronto kick-started my career in computer science. For my senior thesis, I had picked the topic of minimizing Boolean functions. Boolean functions, as Professor Chow has said, are used to represent the computational circuits inside computers. At that time, computer science was not an established field of study, but in spite of this, I found computer science enticing. This was over 50 years ago, the early 1960s. It was a world without smartphones, the internet, Google, or Facebook. Nobody at that time had ever heard of an emoji or even a selfie. You may ask, how was life possible in those primitive days? Well, we did have Star Trek and the Beatles, and as an engineering student at Toronto, I had even played a violin solo dressed as a gypsy with the school's Lady Godiva Memorial Band in a Toronto nightclub called the Bohemian Embassy. So life in engineering at the University of Toronto, even at that time, was not all that culturally impoverished. In my senior year at Toronto, my fascination with computer science grew, and I decided I should get a PhD in this new field. I had to choose between going to MIT or to Princeton. I chose to Princeton because Ed McCluskey was a professor at Princeton at that time, and he was the doyen of Boolean function minimization. In addition, McCluskey kept writing personal letters to me urging me to come to Princeton. I later discovered he was familiar with engineering graduates from the University of Toronto, because John Brzezowski, a former engineering graduate from Toronto, had gone to Princeton a few years earlier to get his PhD under McCluskey. So even then, Toronto had a reputation of being one of the great universities of the world with great students. In my second year at Princeton, a totally unexpected event occurred. Stanford University hired Ed McCluskey, my reason for going to Princeton instead of MIT. But Princeton hired a new graduate from Stanford by the name of John Hopcroft to replace McCluskey. This was a career-changing event for me. At that time, McCluskey had 2 PhD students, me being one of them. The other student and I became Hopcroft's advisees. However, Hopcroft at that time had only 1 PhD research problem. Fortunately, he gave it to the other student and told me, find your own PhD research problem. This turned out to be one of the best pieces of advice he could have said to me. Since I was getting nowhere on finding an efficient algorithm to minimize Boolean functions, I decided this was a good time to switch from Boolean functions to programming languages and compilers. I was very fortunate, for I quickly found my PhD thesis topic in this area, and by the end of my 4th year, I had graduated with my PhD from Princeton. What I learned from this experience is that you shouldn't be afraid to switch directions if you find your current direction isn't working out. Finding my own PhD thesis topic was a challenging but educational learning experience. I would soon learn that once you graduated from school, you did not have an advisor telling you what problems you should work on next. At Princeton, I was given the opportunity to look for my own problems long before I graduated. After Princeton, I joined a newly created research lab called the Computing Sciences Research Center at Bell Labs. This is the lab that invented Unix, C, C++, and many other wonderful things that changed the world of information technology. And this leads me to my second piece of advice. Whenever you can, work with the most talented people in your field, especially when you first start working. You learn so much by working with the best people. I say this because at Bell Labs, I was surrounded by many of the best computer scientists of that time, and perhaps of all time. People like Jeff Ullman, who had been a graduate student with me at Princeton, and people like Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie, the creators of the Unix operating system and the C programming language. Another student who had graduated from Toronto is Brian Kernighan. Brian was 1 year behind me in engineering physics, and then he followed me to Princeton and then to Bell Labs, where he became one of the Unix luminaries. The Kernighan and Ritchie book on C is the Bible of the C programming language. In addition to writing books and papers on computer science at Bell Labs, one of the fun projects I did there was to create with Brian and another student, and another colleague, Peter Weinberger, a little language for solving common data processing languages on a computer. With a language, a programmer could simply express a solution to a data processing problem with only a few lines of code. The language we created became known as awk, after the initials of our last name, and this was because whenever our colleagues saw the 3 of us heatedly discussing the design of the language in an office, they would walk by the door and chant awk, awk, awk. so we had no choice but to call the language awk. Even to this day, awk is still a widely used programming language. Let me conclude by mentioning two intriguing questions concerning the potential future impact of computers on human behavior. The first question is, how much more will human behavior be changed by computers in the coming years? Today, people use smartphones for texting, Google for searching, and Facebook for maintaining relationships. 20 years ago, smartphones, Google, and Facebook did not exist. So the intriguing question is, what new companies and new apps will spring up in the next 20 years? Perhaps some of you will create these new companies and new apps. And how much more will these new apps affect our lives? My second question is even more profound. How much of human behavior can ultimately be simulated by computers? I believe that figuring out the algorithms that the human brain uses to process information is one of the most far-reaching and profound open questions confronting humankind. Discovering these algorithms would enable us to understand how we learn and perhaps lead to better ways of teaching and treating mental diseases. Discovering these algorithms might also allow us to answer the question that I was once asked by Stephen Wolfram, the creator of Mathematica. Can we construct a computer program to simulate human consciousness? As you can see, there are still some truly profound unanswered questions concerning the potential impact of computers. Perhaps some of you will provide answers to these questions in the coming years. I would like to finish once again by extending my best wishes for future success to the great class of 2015. The world is now your oyster. Thank you.